As I was thinking about the topic for tonight's conversation, it occurred to me that it was 10 years ago, right now, that I was finishing my master's degree and trying to figure out what I would do next after I had this degree. So I had a bachelor's in civil engineering, and I was finishing a master's in theology. So what do you do with that, right? So this is a question I was faced with, and I thought about it for a while, and I came up with the perfect solution. You get another degree. So I decided I would do a PhD in U.S. history. Why not? It seemed like a good solution to me. So I called my mother up to tell her the great news, that I was going to pursue another degree in another discipline. Well, my mother, my dear, sweet, patient, loving, understanding mother, said to me, "Son, what is wrong with you? Are you crazy? What is the value of these degrees?" Now, I have to be honest, I had never really thought about that question. I had just sort of been on cruise control, just grabbing diplomas along the way, assuming it would be worth it. Be it my PhD or my master's or my bachelor's, I always assumed it'll be worth the cost to have this diploma. I never considered that question, is it worth it? And that's the question we want to think about tonight. What is the value of a college diploma? How do we calculate it? Is it worth it? Now, if you ask the average American on the street, they would probably say, yes, it is worth it. A college graduate earns 65% over the course of their career, more than someone with just a high school diploma, which is equivalent to about $1 million over the course of their career. So it's little wonder that we currently have more than 21 million Americans enrolled in colleges and universities. And that is double the number from just 20 years ago. Now, on the flip side of that coin, this year, student debt held by those millions of Americans seeking a college diploma, student debt surpassed $1 trillion. And even armed with those diplomas, with those degrees, it is uncertain what value they'll actually have in the market. In fact, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics forecasts that 75% of jobs created over the next decade will not require a college diploma. And of those that do, it's really unclear if a traditional college education will truly provide the necessary skills to succeed. So is it worth it? Well, I'm John Harden. I work for the Charles Koch Foundation on the Higher Education Initiative. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's event hosted by the Charles Koch Institute. And as the over 1,000 alumni of the Institute's educational programs can tell you from firsthand experience, the Charles Koch Institute welcomes debate, scholarship, and analysis on pressing issues like this one, the diploma dilemma. And we're fortunate this evening to have a distinguished panel of guests that are going to help us consider this issue, whether colleges are successfully fulfilling the promise of providing all students with the education that they need to make a better life. Or, as my mother would put it so tenderly, is the diploma really worth it? So without further ado, let's welcome to the platform our moderator for this evening, Washington Post economic correspondent Jim Tankersley, and our distinguished panel.
All right, well, thanks so much for the introduction, and thanks everyone for coming. What a great turnout for an evening in Washington, and not too cold of one either. So I really appreciate you all being here. I'm really excited about our panel and about our topic, which is incredibly important, as you all know, and as I have just begun to start pondering, in part because of the 7-year-old who is sitting in the green room right now playing Angry Birds on my phone, and who promises me he's going to get a soccer scholarship, but I'm not sure I believe him. So without further ado, I want to start with our panelists. Just tell you very, very briefly who they are, and then just jump right away into the discussion. At the end, we'll have time for some questions, so be thinking about that now, what you would like to ask folks and what you think's not being addressed. So I'm just going to skip around because I wrote things down in a different way than they sat down. Beth Akers is a fellow at Brookings. Rich Vedder is an economics professor at Ohio University. You know Mike Rowe. From Dirty Jobs, and Stephen Trachtenberg is the president emeritus of George Washington University. You may have heard of, and Bob Morse is the director of data research at U.S. News and World Report, and he does those ranking things. So
does Rich Vedder.
Right? Yes. Yeah. No. Yes. So we'll get.
Okay,
guys, we're going to get into the rankings. I promise.
That's okay.
But I want to start with as an introduction. Man, no one's ever cut me off during the intro before. This is great.
Well, let's make it even weirder. Is this podium in anybody's way? Because it's bugging the heck out of me. Can we move this at all? It just seems, yeah, right? I mean, if we're not going to use it, well, it's just...
Right.
Or you can just give a speech, Mike, if you want.
I don't know.
I mean...
Well, then
there like
you
a
could pull around.
carbuncle.
Okay.
Action, Jim. Action.
So I want to start... I just want to start by laying out the issue here. And I have a colleague at the Post, Dylan Matthews, who did a great series this year called "The Tuition is Too Damn High," and he points out in one of the pieces the following stat, which I think we all need to keep in mind when we're having this discussion, right? On the question of whether it's worth it. So the median income for a college graduate in America in 2011 was about $50,000 a year. The median income for just a high school graduate with no further schooling was about $29,000 a year. And the median income for someone with an advanced degree, about $87,000 a year. So these are the statistics. The unemployment rate remains much higher for people without college degrees than for people with college degrees. We live in a labor market in which it still clearly is an advantage to have graduated from college. But that's only one part of the equation. So I'd like to put Beth on the spot and say, can you summarize the rest of it for us? What are the issues here with both the costs and the benefits of a college degree and how we should be thinking about that this evening?
Sure. So, the narrative has really shifted in this discussion, and it was just a few years ago that the president made a statement in the State of the Union regarding this push to get more college graduates in the United States so that we just become, again, the number one in terms of college degrees in the world. And this was all based on these figures that we were just cited, which is that, we know that for the people who have gone to college, that there are positive financial returns in terms of wages. We know that there are productivity gains at the national level and all these good things that are hard to measure that come out of education. The narrative has now shifted. In the president's last State of the Union, his remarks on higher education were no longer this unqualified push to get people to go to college, but rather this idea that we need to be shopping when we go to college. And I think this really reflects what's happened in this community around higher education, and it's that we care more about being a little bit more particular and paying more attention to, on these margins, are students making good decisions and how can we help students make good decisions. So this is really where the conversation has come to at this point.
And I wanted, because you mentioned the idea of shopping, and because we have two gentlemen here who have done a lot to help us see, the stickers in the windows maybe a little bit better. We'll start here. Bob, can you tell us how has that shopping changed? And when you're thinking about ranking schools, how much are these questions coming into play now compared to the way that they did maybe in the past?
Well, I definitely think the cost of going to college is one of the key factors for many Americans, and and how much debt they have at they graduate is important to some proportion. It's obviously in the U.S. There's some proportion of the people at a lot of schools, their family can afford the sticker price, and to them they're looking at it differently. So, but there's obviously another large proportion who are having to take out loans and are on Pell Grants, and they're facing a different equation. So So the cost and how much debt is vitally important to some meaningful proportion of college-going students. And now there's the issue of, is the debts getting so high? Are they going to, when they get out, is their job going to, the economic earning power of their job going to be enough to make that choice of debt and degree the right choice? So it's very important.
I want to draw an important distinction here right from the outset about the choice we're talking about, and I want to ask Mike about it. When we're talking about going to college or choosing between colleges, we're talking about, I think, the traditional idea everybody has of a four-year degree. But there are other choices too, and Mike, you've talked a lot about apprenticeships and training programs. What other things should we be thinking about in the scope of this conversation?
Everything. I mean, on Dirty Jobs, we did 300 jobs. We went to all 50 states, and the thing I heard, not just from employees, but from employers, consistently, the most consistent thing, was the challenge of finding people who were willing to learn a truly useful skill and work their butts off. I mean, there's a very Horatio Alger kind of narrative to it, and I don't mean it to sound hackneyed, but it was way more than a coincidence. I mean, everywhere I went. So the notion of a skills gap was something I always kind of understood, but never really read much about, because the narrative, Beth, as you mentioned, right, once 2008 came along, Dirty Jobs changed from a show about exploding toilets and misadventures in animal husbandry to this weird kind of polemic on the changing face of the modern day proletariat, right? I mean, people were suddenly talking really, really actively about the definition of a good job, the cost of getting the training for that job, and all of these things suddenly got relevant. So again, in 2008, I remember somebody from the Wall Street Journal called. I was literally in a sewer when I got the phone call. And the guy introduces himself and says, just wondering if you have any thoughts on these two dichotomous data points, specifically spiking unemployment, widening skills gap. And as it turned out, I didn't really have a thought on it. I just had about 200 conversations that I could reflect back on. And I just said, look, I really think the jobs that are available right now that aren't getting any press are available in part because we simply don't value the kinds of education required to get those jobs or the jobs themselves. And we started to talk about things like just the lexicon itself, higher education, alternative education, right? And anything that wasn't higher suddenly got kind of put under this sort of vocational consolation prize thing. So long story short, my foundation and really the legacy of a show called Dirty Jobs has become a conversation about the opportunities that exist right now, what it costs to get to them, but more than that, trying to foster a general broader appreciation for the fact that closing the skills gap isn't just about employers who need a skilled workforce or unemployed people who need a job. It's about everybody sitting here. It's about keeping the lights on, and Steve and I were just joking earlier about the day he was a hero because he got his toilet unclogged, and how he did that is kind of interesting. But the truth is, our toilets doing what they're supposed to do, and our lights doing what they're supposed to do when you flick the switch. That's the stuff of civilization. And you take any 48-hour period where those two things don't work in concert, and you have what's called a riot.
Sadly, yesterday was National Toilet Day, so we really missed that. But we can still celebrate. But I want to ask Steve. I mean, you headed a large and prestigious university where tuition went way up, in part, as you have eloquently put, in a bid to attract more elite students.
Yes.
So when I go shopping for a car, I have some reasonable expectation that a more expensive car is going to be a better car, and that with some variations in between. Is that true for college? What is the actual economic function we're talking about here?
Who's to say? Who's to say? In fact, what do you mean by a better car? And what do we mean by a better university? Let's think about that for a minute. French, is it really very different if you take it at Harvard or if you take it at East Carolina State? Geometry seems pretty similar around the world. I'm not so sure. But it is not merely the transmission of how to say yes in French that you take French for. A lot of the things that go on in universities are distinguishable from campus to campus. Take a walk around the Harvard campus and then take a walk around some local community college, and you're likely to find Harvard's campus more charming. If you can afford it, going to Harvard seems to me to be a great delight, but it's not an obligation any more than buying a Lexus or a Ford. Well,
Nicely done, Steve.
Yeah.
point is, they both get you to where you're going. And not everybody ought to be going to universities, and not everybody ought to even be going to community colleges, as has been pointed out. There are all sorts of trades, professions for artisans, and individuals have to think through who they are and what they want to be. I have a son who went to a great law school, became an associate at one of the distinguished Wall Street law firms, and hated it. And took me out to dinner one day and said, listen, I hope you won't mind, but I got to get out of here. I'm just not happy. I said, happy? Happiness is something you pursue. You're not supposed to get there. He became a professor, and I now see a man who is fulfilled in his calling. It's really exciting to go visit him and watch how pleased he is with the work he's doing and the life he's leading, even though he took a 50% cut in pay in order to do it. His wife, who was similarly with a big Wall Street firm, when they moved out to the Midwest, interviewed with the Attorney General of the state. And he asked her what she was making at this New York firm. And she said a number, and she said, with the Christmas bonus. And he said, how much is the Christmas bonus? And she said, $50,000. And he said, we can match the bonus. These kids are making half of what they were making, living much better in many ways, in a beautiful home that you can afford in a small town in the middle of Missouri. And their kids are happy and they're happy. I think he actually found happiness. So I don't think everybody ought to go to university, and I think our society doesn't even owe that to everybody. What it owes them is an education which allows them to make a living, which allows them to contribute back to society, which allows them to have good relationships with family and with community, allows them to play a civic role in their society, a whole variety of things which need training. I'm more concerned, frankly, about making sure that young people in America get good elementary and secondary educations than I am seeing them all get access to universities.
Well, Rich, we live in a labor market today where just making a living is no guarantee. That there are 11 million people who are actively looking for work and can't find it. There are millions more who are underemployed, have dropped out of the labor force. It is a hard time to find a job, let alone a good-paying job. Where does the college, if you're a student right now, and you're a senior in high school, and you're thinking about the college calculation, and let's just assume, because I'm a pessimist in all things economics, the labor market's not going to get super great in the next year or so. So if you're trying to think of how you should structure your next move, what should you be thinking about, and where does college and the cost of it come into that?
Well, people are different. One thing this conversation with all of us has pointed out, that one size doesn't fit all in higher education or in any kind of education. Some people ought to be truck drivers. They'll be happy being truck drivers. They'll make good money being truck drivers. They'll be awful if they want to be math professors. They'll be terrible. So what's best for one person is not best for another. The thing that we have lost sight of, I think, in some of the discussion until recently, is that a large percentage of the American population has neither the aptitude nor the ability to do first-rate college work, and even if they did, there are not enough super high-paying, professional, technical, managerial-type jobs to sustain the entire population. We have today 115,000 520 janitors in the United States with bachelor's degrees in 2010. We have more janitors with bachelor's degrees than we have chemists with bachelor's degrees. Now, I don't know if that's good or bad, but I think the question is, if those 115,000 janitors are there, they saying, gee, I'm going to college, and at the end of college, I want to be a janitor, that's fine, cool. But my guess is they went to college thinking they were going to be working on Wall Street, or they were going to do something that paid a lot of money, and their expectations were dashed, and they became unhappy. Happiness is reduced not so much by what you do, but by what you do relative to what you expected to do. And that's why the work of over here is so important, and why more people need to be. Nothing wrong with being a janitor, but you don't need to go to college to be a janitor.
Right. Okay. So I want to kick this one to Beth, and then I want to open it up and just get everybody talking. The problem with that is that we live in an economy right now where the trends over the last few years, really the last decade, have been of specialization, and we are constantly being told that when we lose production jobs, whether it's to robots or to workers in China, that our comparative advantage, the thing that America will always do best, is innovation. That we have the best universities in the world, we have the best new ideas, we have Silicon Valley, we have Wall Street. Wait a second. How do we reconcile the need for good paying jobs and good training for people and the cost of pursuing that with the trends that we've been seeing in the economy?
So Huxley said the greatest threat to freedom is total anarchy, but the second greatest threat is total efficiency. And it's an interesting conversation when you look at efficiency versus effectiveness and what truly is required to get the job done, and how it's so easy to sort of outfox ourselves, especially technology being what it is. We can write checks we can't cash all day long, and of course, a more efficient workforce means a smaller workforce, which means more people trying to figure out who moved their cheese, et cetera, et cetera. So, look, the thing that strikes me about the conversation is that most reasonable people in small groups will always agree with statements like, it's an individual choice. Obviously, one size doesn't fit all. Obviously. But the reality is, at least in my stupid industry, you don't have rational conversations in small groups of people. You have PR campaigns, you have marketing campaigns, and you have this great effort to sum things up and say something very wise that applies to a whole lot of people. And that has created, in part, a whole series, in my opinion, of false expectations. I remember when I was 17, Mr. Dunbar, my guidance counselor, called me down to the office to discuss my future. And based on some test scores, he thought I'd be a good candidate for James Madison University of Maryland. I couldn't afford either at the time. But the bigger issue was I really, truly didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I went to a community college in Maryland. I went to Essex Community College. And I spent 2.5 years there, in large part being wrong. Right? I mean, philosophy, rhetorical analysis. I took introductory courses in all kinds of things, granted, at a modest level. But I was curious. And look, at $28 a credit, I could afford to be wrong. And I was. And today, the thing that I really think has gotten confused in this larger conversation about, go to college or else, is this idea that you can't afford the very thing you're told you need to aspire to. Mr. Dunbar incidentally told me, when I explained this to him, he said, look, the community college thing is totally, it's not your potential, it's beneath it, don't waste your time. And then he pointed to a poster over his shoulder on the wall. And this was from an old, a kind of college recruitment campaign. But I just tell you the story to make the point about big sweeping generalizations. On the poster was a kid, cap and gown, holding his diploma, recently matriculated from some unnamed university, smiling, looking optimistic, sun rising behind him. Next to him, grease monkey, covered in grease or crap or something worse, right? Holding a wrench, looking very much like he had just won the booby prize of all time. And the caption on the poster is a platitude we've all heard, but it was the first time I saw it. It said, work smart, not hard. And he said, which one of those guys do you want to be? My point is, that's such a ridiculous way to promote one form of education at the expense of another. But that paradigm, if you Google "work smart, not hard," there are over 9,000 pages. It's now a saying that pops up on people's briefcases and ball caps, and they have seminars about it. I think in some way a big hunk of the population took that advice and all that came with it, and we're still, playing out this kind of horrible inertia that evolved when college really needed a big push. It got it, but a lot of other things got pulled away in the process.
Jump on in, folks. Yeah.
The other slogan that I think misleads Americans is stay in school, you'll earn more. And I don't think there's anything to be embarrassed about wanting to earn more, but I don't think it's necessarily the reason to stay in school beyond some reasonable point. There are many reasons to go to colleges and universities, and we've got so many economists here that they seem to think it's all about return on investment and how much you're going to make as a result of your degree. Maybe those janitors are leading happier, better, more fulfilled lives in the manner of Cincinnatus, because they got something to think about as they walk behind the broom. I'm not sure that the relationship of education to employment is one-to-one. Now, I think you're going to be very unhappy if you can't get a job and you can't make a living. So I don't want to be accused of arguing that case. But I think there's more to going to college, more to education, than merely becoming vocationally prepared.
There's also, I agree with what Steve said, but at the same time, there is a risk element associated with any decision one makes in life, and there's a pretty substantial risk associated with going to college. Now, the graduation rate statistics are imperfect and subject. Beth can speak to this better than I can. They're not perfect. But, roughly 2 out of every 5 Americans do not get a degree within, say, 6 years of starting a bachelor's program full-time that want to get a bachelor's. And I'm not saying 4 years, I'm saying 6 years, 2 out of 5. So there's a fairly substantial risk associated with this. And we have to ask ourselves, why is there such a large dropout rate? And secondly, does that mean that some people are being counseled into college by the Mr. Dunbars of the world, and my wife, by the way, is a high school guidance counselor too, that perhaps should have been sent along a different path? 50,000 versus 29,000. Even if you want to be mercenary and you want to look at the numbers, sounds like great. But what if you don't get to the 50 and you get stopped halfway and you drop out of school and you have $30,000 of student loan debt? And in the meantime, you would love to drive a truck. And your mom and dad said, no, you can't drive a truck. You got to go to school. And so, that's an element. I think Americans are catching on to this. I think enrollment statistics, correct me if I'm wrong, Bob, isn't it true? I think the fall enrollment stats are showing a slight decline the last year or two. There seems to be, as costs go up and the perceived benefits, and even in financial sense, are leveling off somewhat, maybe even going down. I think some people are starting to catch on and say no to the traditional college experience. Having said all this, though, there are some kids who graduate in the top 5% of their class from a suburban high school who have been offered a full tuition ride at Harvard University or George Washington University, who should go. I mean, absolutely should go, because they're likely to be happy in life from having gone. They're going to derive both economic benefits and non-economic benefits from the college experience, and they're going to be successful in life. So different strokes for different folks.
And I can fix the dropout rate right here in front of you. Yeah.
Oh.
At the end of those 2 years, before they drop out, give them an associate's degree and turn them into graduates. You don't have to be a dropout. You ought to get some credit for what you did, instead of being put out the door with nothing to show for it. If they've got 60 credits, let's award them an associate's degree and let them be able to take that to the employment office when they go to interview.
Well, I'd like to talk about I think we've been talking about the people who shouldn't go to college, but we're also getting these messages of people who are paying attention that the way that we're in a knowledge economy, and that there's also the skills gap of the STEM industries, and those jobs acquire. So on one hand, which is true, many people shouldn't be going to college that need to go to college, but there's many industries who need science, technology, engineering, and math graduates who need to be educated, and we have a pipeline issue of minorities and the changing demographics, or are those skills gaps going to be met? And those require actually education. So that's another sort of level of this issue that there needs to be more STEM graduates or STEM trained people to sort of meet these jobs that the economy is producing. So I'll just throw that out as another aspect of this sort of the education issue.
Yeah, so I think that's true, that there is this demand for STEM. That's a narrative that's we've been discussing for a long time now. But I think what's not discussed often is that a lot of the demand is actually in less than bachelor's degrees. So, it still takes us back from this narrative that everybody should be going to college. We can still potentially fulfill some of this gap in the STEM industry with alternative post-secondary degrees other than the bachelor's degree. And I'll take a step back a little bit further to further support the economists who are thinking of this purely as a return in wages or the financial. I speak about the returns to education quite often, and I get pushed back on using this framework all the time. You're ignoring these other pieces, sort of what we've discussed already here today. And I think that that's an absolutely correct point. But I think that the concern, especially from a policy perspective, is that there are groups of people for whom it is critically important that they know the financial returns to the potential decisions that they're making. And my feeling about that is that it's not students who are going to be choosing between elite or mid-tier institutions who are going to be opting into an institution that has a different financial return from the other, but rather students who are on this margin of not going to a bachelor's degree program, choosing an associate's degree program, or potentially choosing a trade program. So to me, this is where the emphasis needs to be on financial returns.
Mike, why don't more students choose trade programs? Is it social stigma? Is it incentives of the system? What is it in your experience?
When's the last time you saw a plumber or a refrigerator repair guy who really knew his business portrayed on TV, who didn't have a work belt and about a yard of butt crack hanging out? Right? It just doesn't happen. We have a way of portraying certain vocations and certain avocations, and if you stray too far beyond that, in the production world, you create a disconnect. You challenge a pre-existing thing. That's bad in my business, but it's even worse in this business, because those things. Look, for years, the best-selling book on the New York Times list was a buddy of mine wrote it, Tim Ferriss, called The 4-Hour Work Week. Right, the 4-hour work week. This is everything you need to know how to work and thrive by working 4 hours a week. It's not a bad book, but when you look at the books that people are loving, when you look at the portrayals of work, like when Dirty Jobs went on the air, there were no other work shows. Now we got Deadliest Catch, you got Ice Road Truckers, you got this and that, but still, they all redound to their stereotypes, almost always. And it happens on the other side too, right? It's once you start, positioning, again, from a narrative standpoint, who are we going to get for the egghead elite, right? And now these people all start to sound the same. And so those things are powerful. Imagery is powerful, metaphors are powerful, languages are powerful. But we do so many things in pop culture over the last 40 years to reinforce those stereotypes that when it comes time for a kid to sit down and seriously evaluate his or her options, most parents don't put it all on the table. They just don't do it, because in the back of their mind, everybody had a Mr. Dunbar to some degree, and we still, look, there are 3.9 million jobs available right now. 3 million of them fall under this trade, transportation, commerce area. 10% of them require a 4-year degree. 90% of the big chunk of available jobs right now require the two things that we ought to be rewarding: a willingness to learn a useful skill and just the joy of working hard. Those two things have both been under a quiet kind of attack, I believe, for a long time in a lot of different ways. Now, I do think there are huge benefits to becoming learned and wise and smart and educated that have nothing to do with financial remuneration. But it's funny that that point always comes up in these conversations, because it almost always happens because there's a perceived slight or a push against, the education process. And I mean no slight. I just mean to say that at some point, where are we, $1.1 trillion in student loans now? I got 400 notes today on my stupid Facebook page from parents telling me about their kids with the degrees now living back in their basements. It's happening. There's a huge disconnect. So there's got to be an okay way to talk about all of it without anybody feeling like they get their toes stepped on.
I always liked that TV show, This Old House. I thought the carpenter was terrific.
I'll tell him you said hi.
But you're right. Some of the most glamorous shows that are using the imagery are the lawyer shows, and that's a field that, unless you're from an elite school, you're having some of the greatest trouble as a profession, because big laws stop tiring. So the implication, you can get these big there's probably lawyers in this audience, but you probably have good jobs in Washington. But if you look at the stats, that's not the case. So, but that's an example of your point that some of the glamour shows aren't
Number one show
matching.
Number one show in the history of modern television. Little thing called American Idol, right? I mean, American Idol. It's, again, nothing bad to say about the show. I'm friends with the people that produce it. But what is it we're celebrating? What is it we're encouraging? I'll have my fame, please, and I would like it now would be convenient. If I could just have that now, please. I'd really rather not wait, because I've been told I can. Look, if you really want to see a profound disconnect, forget the winners of American Idol. Watch the first 2 episodes every season, when the line stretches beyond the field of sight, full of people who are absolutely convinced they're the next Mariah Carey or Justin Timberlake. Somebody told them they could sing. They believed it. And now we get to see that something was wrong. Well, that doesn't just happen in Hollywood and on TV shows. It happens in education. Somebody told me I was a precious little snowflake, and I took the test, and I'm smart, and then I went to college, and then I got my degree. So where's my job? And now the only thing that's really clear about my appearance is the chip on my shoulder, and that's not very hireable either.
I would point out that despite our portrayal on television, people do seem to still want to be journalists for some reason. So it doesn't always work directly that way. And members of Congress, right? They also seem to want to be members of Congress despite everything.
Yeah, but Woodward and Bernstein, right? I mean, just still.
Right.
I mean, those two.
But talking about, and I think it's interesting, we've got 2 guys here who are the driving forces behind major selling. Like Forbes and U.S. News make a lot of money on your college rankings, right? So you're not ranking community colleges in the way with that force of capturing the imagination that ranking elite colleges does. So is there a disconnect there?
Well, I mean, we've made you're right. We've chosen not to rank community colleges, and for one main reason, people really aren't making a choice. They tend to be, there's a reason, they tend to be place bound, and they're going to the college that's within a 50-mile or less radius. So they're not using. They're basing it on, if this school has a program, they're going to go, or they're going to choose a program that's in their relative range and go to that school. So it doesn't. I mean, but the community colleges probably do need to be evaluated, and it's probably one of the things that should be done and hasn't been done, because they're escaping any kind of they're operating under the premise of, trust me, we're operating both a sort of a 4-year prep program, and we're operating trade programs, and we're linked into private industry, and we have funding, and we shouldn't be measured because it's really complicated, and the traditional ways of, which is true, the traditional tools of measuring the way we're doing a 4-year schools don't work, but it doesn't mean people shouldn't, and we haven't done it yet, but shouldn't figure out a way to do it, because there's millions, I think there's 6 or 8 million people going to the 2-year colleges, way more than 4-year, and some of the same issues. Are they getting their degree? I mean, the debt is a lot less, but we should figure out a way to focus on them, and we haven't.
We are going to take questions from the audience here in just a second. I have one more, and then I would love to open it up. And that is, we've been talking a lot about what I would call the supply side here. What choices should individual students make? But I'd like to talk about the side of from the supply of colleges. Should the real discussion here be, is college too expensive, and should we be trying to figure out ways to make it a cheaper option for more students, whether that's a 4-year college, 2-year college, vocational school, whatever? What's the right balance in that discussion?
I think Scotch is too expensive. The range of price as well as cost, which the words keep getting confused. The range of prices, tuitions at universities and colleges across the country is vast. And you can go to very expensive schools where, interestingly enough, if you have certain skills, for example, if you're 7 feet tall and can sink a basketball, you can go for free. And maybe you'll be a dropout after 2 years and nobody will judge you for it because you're going to the NBA, is a terrific deal. On the other hand, there are state institutions and community colleges where the tuition is very inexpensive, and somebody who puts the package together can do an associate's degree at a community college and then go on and get the bachelor's degree at a 4-year state college, and then go on to the state university and get a PhD if that's what they want, or an MD, or a law degree, God forbid, and at the end of the process have a relatively small debt load. On the other hand, you can find institutions which charge a great deal of money and provide a whole variety of services beyond what goes on in the classroom. And there are an awful lot of people who seek that out. It's America. We like to provide choice. And I think people ought to be permitted to do what they want to do with their money, even if the decisions are...
Yeah, but it's not always their money. A lot of them are using federal money. They're using private philanthropic money that is provided. Some of it is their money. And I agree, Steve's right, that there are a wide range of options, wide range of prices in America. And indeed, by the way, the Harvards of the world actually, when you look at what the kids actually pay, probably pay on average less than they do at some of the lesser reputational schools. Having said that, however, if you compare the cost of college as the checks are written now with what they were 20, 30, 40 years ago, and if you look at that, and even if you look at the growth in earnings, until recently the growth of earnings kind of kept up with the growth of college costs, so for many students it was a good deal. That's becoming more and more questionable now. So the question is, why have the costs gone up so much? You know, the old argument was, well, colleges are like theater, and they are in a way. You know, I'm a college professor. I'm a kind of an actor. I get up, I teach the same way Socrates did 2,400 years ago. Not as good, but the point is, we don't use capital labor substitution in teaching like we do in everything else. Well, you know, maybe we can. You know, we have something called computers now, I hear, and MOOCs and, you know, other things. Where in the heck are we using them? Why aren't the colleges focusing on cutting costs? Well, there's no incentives for them to. And when the government is dropping money out of airplanes or the equivalent, and say, oh, students borrow the money, the colleges have no skin in the game. There's zero skin in the game. If the kid defaults on the loan, do the colleges care? No, they don't suffer anything. We need to reform that whole system.
Okay, I'm not, so I'll throw out this, and this is going to be, it's going to be glib. So and this does not apply to Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. We're going to find out as a U.S. higher education system if there is a limit to price when the Chinese stop thinking it's worthwhile to come to the U.S. because for many schools that's been schools have been depending on getting a larger per percent of international students who are full pay as a way of making up for their budget cuts, and they've been increasing their out-of-state tuitions as this is for publics. And if that bubble if that trend starts going the other direction, which it isn't yet, then we're going to see if the price still can go up as much as it has been. So I'll throw.
I'm going to let Beth have the last word on this, and then we got to go out to the audience.
Okay.
So, okay.
Great. So just this question again, is tuition too high at this point? I think what's interesting is that this is a sort of a mystery because we know on average what college costs. Pick a bachelor's degree. We know on average what a bachelor's degree costs. We have estimates of what that buys you in terms of earnings over the course of your lifetime. But if I'm a student and I'm looking at an individual institution and saying, is the price that they're going to charge me worth it, right, in the long run? I have no idea. I have no way of knowing what that's going to buy me in the future just because of the data limitations right now. So is tuition too high? Maybe not on average, but there's this problem that, we have a difficult time evaluating it at the institution level.
But
All
isn't
right.
it weird too? Sorry, I know that. Sorry, second to the last word. Isn't it just weird that? I mean, I love the Scotch metaphor. I'm with you, and I know some brands that are a bit more value priced. If you want me to provide a list, but
I'll drink to that.
There you go. So cross out education for a minute and write in something that isn't booze related, but just as aspirational and maybe even more important. Say health. Okay? With the exception of a decent education and the ability to apply it in a useful way, what's more important? Health and fitness. So, do we look at gyms the same way we look at colleges? If we did, we would say, well, for $500 a month, you can go to the Bay Club, and they've got fancy machines, and they've got great personal trainers, and look at how fit and healthy you can get. Or, for $12 a month, you can go to the Y. It's funny, it's the same equipment, right? And so at some point, you begin to think, well, I think the difference might be what I put into it. Certainly, there's a difference in what you'll pay for it, which begs the earlier question. You can either afford it or you can't. If you can afford $500 a month to go, God bless, do it. Yeah. But how come we don't talk about education in the same way we talk about fitness? Why all of a sudden is there this giant thing that makes it hard to say, well, maybe we should go ahead and borrow $488 a month in order to go to the good club?
All right. Good point to the audience. So people are walking around with microphones, and we'll just start right there in my field division.
Hello.
Oh, yeah, please identify yourself, name and organization if applicable.
Hello, my name is Casey Given. I'm a policy analyst studying education at Americans for Prosperity. I have a question for Mr. Morse, actually. As you may be aware, the Obama administration's response to kind of lowering the cost of education has been to give consumers more information. They've currently proposed a plan to rank colleges based on
ratings, but go ahead.
Yes, exactly. Based on a number of different factors, which has kind of perplexed education policy analysts since a number of private organizations, such as U.S. News and World Report, already does so. So my question is, what has U.S. News' response been to that? And how do you think their ranking stacks up compared to yours?
Well, oh boy. Of course, we're definitely following all the conversations and open forums, and when somebody from the Department of Ed speaks about the college ratings and their plan for it, we're aware of it. And of course, U.S. News has been used as we're going to, the college ratings are going to be measuring the right things because the government says they're the right things, and U.S. News is measuring the wrong things, or or at least not measuring the right things. So we're aware that we're being used as a way of we're going to do something better. I would sort of pose some of the challenges the college ratings are going to have that, and Rich and we discussed this before, where both of us work in what's called big data. We're using large, giant data sets to produce our college ratings, and at least I personally think that what the Obama administration is saying about what the college ratings are going to measure doesn't really match up with the data that's available. So they're saying they're going to actually succeed at measuring some of the holy grails of what all the higher education researchers are saying should be done, values and outcomes, and linking which schools are doing better for the economically disadvantaged students. And they're going to divide up schools into many categories, and everybody's going to be compared to the right category, and they're going to succeed at it. And I think that's a really a long shot for them to do. And that's just producing the ratings, and that's not getting into this bigger issue, which I think we all have to deal with, as is everybody in this room and outside of it. Should ratings be used as a policy tool for government funding, and should the government be choosing winners and losers for funding by choosing the methodology? So that's at least a part of it, and I'm not going to say right or wrong, but there is a problem that needs to be fixed. And should it be fixed by this, that the government is really funding higher education? And I mentioned this earlier. Should the for-profits, who actually are government profits because their model is to use federal funding, and their greater proportion of their revenue is through funding. So there's a problem of the government's funding a lot of students, and are we getting something in return? But sort of how to solve that problem, is it through this federal funding Pell Grant mechanism, creating the image that they're going to actually can do that level of specificity analysis with data is a very big stretch. So that's a lot to.
All right.
Hope
yes,
that answers your question.
In the back over there.
Hello, my name is Corey. I work in politics here in DC, and I'm the eldest child of 2 college graduates, the former of which is a owner of a marina that we specialize in fishing with tourists, and it's messy and all that. Whenever I go home and walk out into the dock at my dad's business and smell fish and gasoline, and I kind of visualize the experience as being a fisherman in Florida, I realized that there's a lot of pride and there's kind of an internal economy within my dad's business and sort of the local beach fishermen. And I wonder, so we've sort of alluded to the whole culture around higher education, traditional schools, alternative schools. I wonder, the kids that I grew up with, my sister, my youngest sister, those that are just about to enter college or considering it, I wonder what the panelists, and I guess Mike, since we're talking about fish and gas and messy stuff, that you should sort of maybe tackle this one. But how do we sort of raise the profile of these people who are extremely fulfilled and feel very, thrilled to go up and go to work every day? How do we sort of raise the profile of these people who don't get the attention that we've seen in Hollywood and whatnot?
Right. In my opinion, we can't raise their profile. All we can do is change our own perception. People have been catching fish for as long as fish have been swimming around, and people have been eating them for just as long. But I'm not sure we're, as a group, sufficiently blown away by the miracle of modern fishing, or modern electricity, or smooth roads and runways, or indoor plumbing. And look, this is my little show was really, first and foremost, it was a show, but the reason it stayed on for as long as it did was because it did become a very modest way to find the people that you've just described and really spend a day with them. And get an honest look, not just at their education, not just at their facility in a particular job, but their life, their attitude. Look, there's a dirty jobs worldview. If I could get around to it, there's a dirty jobs manifesto. And it really is very libertarian in its roots. It's founded on personal responsibility and a good-natured willingness to take a bite of the crap sandwich when it comes around, right? I mean, it's a crude way to say it, but it happens. And that's what we were seeing on our show, again and again and again. People who were not only good at what they did, but they embraced the adversity in their daily life, and it was empowering, and it was fun to watch it. It was fun to document it. And look, Micro Works, which evolved out of the show, is fundamentally a PR campaign for hard work, skilled labor, alternative education, entrepreneurship, and innovation. Kind of grand. Mostly it's hard work and skill. And so raising the profile of those things begins with challenging Mr. or Mrs. Dunbar when they come across your radar. It involves, your gut instinct when you see the guy repaving the road and now you have to stop is to kind of curse him. What we ought to be doing is saying, hey, thanks, the road's not going to repave itself. So look, it's kind of pie in the sky, but it starts with appreciation. And if there's not a collective appreciation, both for the higher educated and for the skilled, then we're going to be in the same mess we're in. These two things aren't opposites. They're two sides of the same coin.
Let's try to grab a couple more questions. We'll go right down here.
Hi, my name is Jessica, and I'm working in politics here on the Hill. And I keep hearing the need for people who are willing to work hard and learn an important skill. So my question is open to the whole panel, and my question is, how does immigration relate to this? Because it's a three-pronged thing as far as I see it. We got people on H-1 visas who want to come in and do highly skilled jobs and get their education here, if they don't already have it. Or dreamers who really want the ability to go to college and return to our economy, work, and get the opportunity for better jobs. And also undocumented workers who are working in mostly in agriculture and other jobs. And there's actually a lot of openings in agriculture that a lot of Americans won't take. So my question is, how does immigration play into the diploma dilemma?
Economists want to take that? Go for it.
Well, I wrote 30 or 40 papers in my early career on immigration, so maybe I should jump in on this. And to get tenure, by the way, which I recommend highly. There's no question that we have a problem in higher education with the visa system as it works. And you talk to presidents of any American college university, you talk to employers, you talk to anyone, we have a significant problem with the lack of ability of qualified, highly motivated people from other countries coming into this country and entering both our educational system and the workforce. So I have, speaking personally, have believed that we have, as a nation, been remiss in dealing with this problem, and that this is an area that needs to be addressed. And many others on both sides of the aisle have agreed with this. So I think, for example, the H-1B visa system needs to be either numerically expanded, maybe we need even change the way we do it. Colleges and universities have to deal with this, but there's also, there's some national security issues and so forth, so there are trade-offs here. But I think as a whole, we've missed out on our potential here. However, someone here was saying earlier, Bob was, I think, Bob Morse, that American colleges are now looking increasingly to other nations as a salvation of their financial problems. Right. And I know my university, I think we send gangsters around China to Shanghai, if I may use a term.
recruiter agents.
Back to the United States, and we have these
recruiting agents.
We have these undergraduate students who dye their hair and put rings in their nose and look just like trying to look like American students, and even perform like American students, which is doubly unfortunate.
Right. Except on math.
I'm serious about this, who pay full tuition, they pay full freight, and therefore our president of the university says, This is solving our financial problem. So I think it's a complex issue. I'm not sure this is the appropriate public, policy to promote that. So it's a complex issue.
I want every panel I moderate ever again to combine wine and tenured professors. That was a great answer. Okay, we got time for one more question. We'll go way in the back there for our last question.
Chris Bedford at the Daily Caller. We've been talking about the need for STEM and the need for more skills, but my neighbor, for example, went to college 4 years and got a degree in pottery. There's probably about a dozen papers written by gender studies majors about there's not enough women in mathematics. And the economics departments are full of people who have never worked in business and teach that the free market is bad. At what point, and I think this is, Stephen, you'd probably be best for answering this, what role does the college have in actually delivering a decent product for these $200,000?
What's a decent product? We need a whole panel to figure that one out. People want to study pottery. This is America. It's not for me or anybody else to tell them not to study pottery. If they want to invest in a stock or open a business that goes bankrupt, look, you got two brothers. One goes to university, the other buys a medallion in New York and drives a taxi cab. Mike likes the taxi cab driver. I like the guy who comes to my university and pays the tuition. We're each entitled to our options.
My guy can drive your guy to school.
But look, I think these are not easily resolved issues because they have to do with freedom. They have to do with choice. They have to do with what people want to do with their lives. Now, Professor Vedder is right. To some extent, they're being supported by public funds. And one of the reasons we have the terrible lawyer problem we have today is because the federal government essentially opened up the doors and paid the tuitions or lent people money to pay their tuitions at law schools, and universities opened up law schools, and students wanted to come to law school because it gave them a profession, and for a long time it worked, and then it didn't. If we had known that we were going to have this problem, well, maybe not. We wouldn't open as many law schools. The fact of the matter is, I think in the next several years, you're going to see law schools fail, close. You're going to see colleges fail, close. There are a lot of colleges open in America today who are dead and don't know it yet. On the other hand, we're not going to see place-based universities disappear. We're not going to see research universities disappear. Disruption, yes. We're going to have to reinvent the way we do education. The BA degree doesn't have to take 4 years. I get a calendar every year from my garage, forgive me, Mike, and in addition to a picture of an attractive woman, it has 12 months, and I get the catalog from the university, and it has 8. Somebody stole May, June, July, and August. Why do we have a physical plant that's worth $2 billion in sunk costs, and we don't drive it 12 months a year? There's no other industry in the world that would run itself that way. And why does the work week end on Thursday night? That's party night at universities, and Fridays. There are hardly any classes. When I went to college, we went to school 5 days a week, and there were classes on Saturday until noon, and so on. I mean, there's just a lot of things you could do to run universities more effectively, more efficiently. It's never been incentivized. Efficiency was never part of the agenda. It's increasingly becoming part of the agenda, and you're going to see a transformation of it. Medical school should take 3 years, not 4. It should be illegal to take 8 years to get a PhD. I can go on for an hour on this subject. You don't want me to do that. Essentially, the world's going to change, and there's going to be more distance learning than there was. But universities are just like so many other things. The newspapers are being changed. Medical delivery is being changed, and the universities, for the first time, are being asked to change the model from one that worked for a long time since medieval days. Forgive me. The least effective way to deliver information is through a lecture. The reason we have lectures at all is because once upon a time, the professor had the book. He had his information. He would come to a class, he'd stand before a platform, and he would talk, mostly men in those days, and the students wrote down what he said. At the end of the semester, they had his book. Then they invented movable type. You would have thought that would have done away with the lecture. Well, books were expensive initially. Back in the old days, they used to have to chain the books to a pole in the library so that students didn't steal them. You still see that in European universities, some places. And so the lectures continued. By the time they got to paperbacks, the lectures should have ended, but they didn't. And then we discovered television and a whole variety of technologies which made it possible to deliver the lecture without having the lecturer. Clearly, but universities are still building lecture halls. They're still building buildings with lecture halls. Clearly, that's going to change. There's going to be more and more education done with computers. There's going to be more and more education done online. The old-fashioned ways are going to accede to some of the innovations of the new. We're going to see consolidations. We're going to see changes. It's going to be a whole new world. Welcome to it.
Well, thank you all so much for coming to our fantastic panel. I want to thank our panelists so much. It was a really great discussion. Thanks to our hosts. Thank you for your attention and your great questions. So have a great night.